Hello and welcome to Introduction to Museology Week 3. I hope you all are doing well. It's very warm here in Victoria, so I'm very happy today. I'm happy to be here with you too as well. Last week, the discussion focused heavily on national museums, very large-scale museums, and those are great for telling broad stories, but as was apparent in some of the comments, museums, they're good for very specific and small stories as well and small scale. That's why I'm going to be focusing this discussion on historic houses. So to do that, I'm going to be introducing you to Christeah Dupont, who works at the Point Ellice House here in Victoria. I feel like because I live in the same area as the Point Ellice House and Christeah, I can give you a little background about the museum scene in Victoria. Victoria has two sort of larger scale museums. We talked about maritime museums last week. Victoria has a maritime museum, and they also have a very big national museum, the Royal BC Museum, which covers natural history, Indigenous history, Canadian history, things like that. So these are very broad scale, but Victoria also has several historic houses. They have a castle, which is out in Colwood, about, I don't know, a 20-minute drive from here. And they also have another heritage home, which is called Craigdarroch Castle. So that's kind of a family museum as well, a family heritage home. So Victoria sort of caters to different heritage histories, and Point Ellice House is another one of those, which highlights prominent families in Victoria. I think heritage homes are really great because they give an opportunity to tell about the type of lifestyle that the people who actually lived in that community lived. So that's what the Point Ellice House is great for. And Victoria flourished during the Victorian era, so I'm glad that the Point Ellice House is here to give a little indication of that time, because it was very quickly moving, quickly developing during that time. So I think the Point Ellice House is a great place to be. I am going to stop my introduction here though and lead you into the discussion, but I will say that the Point Ellice House is in a beautiful area of Victoria, and I know it's very well respected in Victoria. So without further ado, I'll introduce Christeah to you. Hi, I'm here with Christeah Dupont, who is the assistant curator of the Point Ellice House. How are you doing, Christeah?
I'm very good, thank you.
Can you tell the viewers about what you do at the Point Ellice House? I'm really excited to have you because you work somewhere that has the gardens as well as a house.
Yeah, so I am, as you said, the assistant curator at Point Ellice House. My job is to look after the heritage house itself, as well as all of the objects in the collection. And because we are a fairly small staff and we are a nonprofit, I do a whole bunch of other things as well on top of being the assistant curator. So I'll sometimes help with events, and I'll sometimes help with interpretation and public programming. So we all wear many hats at Point Ellice House.
Can you talk a little about the history of the Point Ellice House?
So Point Ellice House was originally built in 1861, 1862. It was originally lived in by Peter O'Reilly, who was the Indian Reserves Commissioner of British Columbia. Him and his family moved in 1867, and him and his children and his grandchildren lived there. So you've got 3 generations of O'Reillys living there, and all of them kept their parents' and their grandparents' stuff. So we have one of the most complete collections of essentially Victorian household goods in North America.
I live in Victoria too. I haven't actually been to the Point Ellice House, but it's on my list.
Well, we're reopening soon, so you should come.
I will. You talked a little about what you do, but can you give us a little rundown about your daily life at the museum and your daily?
Yeah. A lot of what I do is project-based, so I will essentially propose a collections project, or I will talk to my boss and say, hey, I've been thinking about digitizing all of the photographs in the collection, or doing an inventory So I have lots of kind of big projects on the go. Right now, I am digitizing many photographs, and my day is kind of interspersed with different projects, and sometimes we have students on site from the University of Victoria who will come and do projects on some of, like school projects on some of our objects or the history of Point Ellice House. But my day also has quite a bit of cleaning involved, as my job is to look after the house. And number one tip for conservation is just, keep things clean, keep the bugs out, keep the dust down, and that will help make your stuff last longer. So in general, every day is a little bit different, but I can almost always guarantee that I'll pick up a rag at some point during the day.
I think that's a good thing to realize. Something I want my students to realize is that museums like that, they're often run by a small staff.
Mm-hmm.
What type of collections does the Point Ellice have?
So, like I said, there's 3 generations of O'Reilly stuff. So they lived in Point Ellice House from 1867 until 1975, when they sold the house to the province. And so you can find pretty much anything there. If you name it, we probably have it. Everything in the house is original to the 19th and early 20th centuries, right down to the bed sheets. So we've got furniture, musical instruments, photographs, documents, books, letters, awards, gardening tools, bibs. Like, we have a little bit of everything essentially, which is a blessing and a curse. Because on one hand, it's really awesome that we get to tell all of these stories. We have lots of objects to interpret, but it's also a big job to have over 12,000 objects to look after and not necessarily have the space to actually properly be able to look after them.
Yeah, I can imagine. What do they come to the Point Ellice House for? Like, what are the common research questions you get?
We get, just because we have so much to talk about, we have a little bit of everything. Some people are really interested in Kathleen O'Reilly and Mary, and they kind of want to look at like the women's history side of things. Right now, there is a UVic graduate program that's looking at our book collections. So they're looking at different ways of interpreting the books as objects, not just as things to read. We have also had the public history master's program at UVic come and do projects on our calling card collection. But we get lots of just, kind of emails and things, just people asking, oh, well, I was researching my grandfather's vacuuming business and I found that you guys have one of his types of vacuums in your collection. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? So we get lots of, we get everything from big master's projects to just kind of general public inquiries, which is very fun to answer all of those questions.
That's amazing. Can you talk about the interplay between working in the gardens and in the historic house? Like, how much time is divided between both?
Of my time?
Yeah.
I don't work in the gardens at all.
Oh.
I have occasionally helped out when we've been short-staffed, or so occasionally we'll have like work parties, like right before we are about to reopen. We will all, like, everybody right up to the executive director will essentially pick up a spade and we'll all help out. But for the most part, I don't ever work in the gardens. All of my duties are mainly in the house and with the collection.
Okay, I didn't realize that, but that's good to know. Back to your duties, I guess. What do you think is unique about the Point Ellice House?
In comparison to other museums, or?
Yeah.
I think that because it is a heritage house, we've got, we can tell bigger stories about British Columbia and Canadian history, but on a bit of a smaller scale, and it's a little bit more, I feel like there's a bigger opportunity to learn than versus, in some of the larger museums for the general public, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mainly have permanent exhibits, or is there temporary exhibits as well?
So in the visitor center, we have one exhibit that rotates every year. Currently, it's the Springs and Scavengers exhibit, which talks about the history of water and waste in Victoria. And we talk a lot about the night scavengers, who were the men who would go and essentially empty or collect emptied chamber pots and things like that. And just history of, access to water for different people in the city in very early Victoria. So we do have that one rotating exhibit space, and then there are plenty of permanent exhibits in the house itself. We do refresh like little things here and there, and we have several like exhibit cases and things that will rotate out. So there's always something kind of new to see. We want people to return, which is part of the reason why we have the permanent exhibit or the temporary exhibit space. So I guess it's a mix of both, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, that's cool. I also wanted to ask what brought you to the Point Ellice House in the beginning?
Lack of a job in the sector. So my mother says that she took me to Point Ellice once when I was a baby. I do not remember it. And despite living in Victoria, I had never been there before, except for that one time as a child. And that's something that we hear from a lot of people who come to visit Point Ellice House, is that they didn't know that we were even there, and they've never visited. They didn't even know that Point Ellice House existed. So we're just trying to get on people's radar, as it were.
I've been aware of Point Ellice House. I just think it's a bit out of the way. Like, I don't drive, so I think it's hard to get there a bit.
It's not that bad. It's on a major bus route, so it's actually not too bad. But our neighbors are a steel recycling company, a mulch and gravel yard, and a garbage dump. So our neighbors are not ideal. So a lot of people don't even know that we're here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I'm going to ask is, can you give some advice for somebody who might be wanting to get into the museum field?
I think that my best piece of advice is ask lots of questions and volunteer everywhere and everywhere, because your connections that you make in your internships and in your volunteer work are going to carry you forward and into an actual career, more so than you think. I think it's so important that you get in and kind of see it from the ground level as a volunteer.
I totally agree with you, and thank you for that advice. And thanks for chatting with me today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I hope that was enjoyable for you all. I know I really enjoyed talking to Christia. We've done a couple projects in the past related to heritage in Victoria, so if you like, I can share those with you. But something I want to highlight in terms of our recap, I will say that these recaps are not to reiterate everything that was said, because I realize you all listened to the discussion, but I just want to highlight points that me as a museum professional I pick up on, and I think that might be beneficial to you. So as she stated, she works in a nonprofit heritage homes. Given that this museum is nonprofit, it's already different from the museums I've talked about before, because obviously it's a smaller budget, as Christia said. And also in terms of museology, I think it's really important to realize that this type of hands-on approach to museums, in terms of cleaning, in terms of being involved with every aspect from public programming to events, like Christia said, that's very representative of real life museums. I really think it's important to note as well that working in a heritage home also means taking care of the house as well as objects. So I think this is very different from, say, the British Library, where you're looking after the objects more so than the architectural house itself. So this is a really important aspect, and I think adds a bit of pressure, as was apparent in the discussion. The Point Ellice House, it was designated a National Historic Site in 1966 and became a Provincial Historic Site in 1975. So something I can say this about Victoria because I live here. Victoria does actually have several heritage homes around, so it's something we're used to. So they celebrate heritage in different ways. I think in other countries as well, a lot of countries have heritage homes. Victoria actually does have a Heritage BC website which talks about what makes heritage in British Columbia. So I'll link that as well so you can get a better idea of what heritage means in Canada and in Victoria, because I think Victoria has a very specific heritage scene. The last thing I'll say, and I hope it was apparent in this discussion, is that the Point Ellice House and heritage homes also, they can be very personal in their story. So you can tell a large era story. So in this case, it's Victorian era, but you can tell it through the scope of a small family. So in this case, the O'Reilly family, 3 generations of O'Reillys. I think that's really interesting. I think Kristia gave a good indication of how museums can be personal to one family. So in this case, it's the O'Reilly family, but that family can show different generations and the passing of time. So if you look in the collections, you might find specific objects from different times. And I hope this is what you get out of the discussion today. And as you saw last week, there will be another video in the end of this week talking more broadly about these themes. But thank you.